The massive chamber floated in the void between stars, its crystal walls catching and bending light from distant galaxies. Inside, 12 beings from across the known universe sat in a perfect circle, each representing their species on the Galactic Council. The air shimmered with energy fields and translation matrices that allowed completely different forms of life to communicate as one. Ambassador Vexithalan shifted his crystalline body, the light refracting through his transparent form, casting rainbow patterns on the chamber walls. His species, the Etherians, had evolved beyond physical matter eons ago, existing as living crystal formations that could manipulate energy at will. Today's meeting agenda bored him, but protocol demanded attendance. "Next item," announced High Counselor Zaramoth, her voice echoing from the containment field that housed her pure energy form. "Periodic review of developing civilizations. Sector designation, Sol 3. Species classification, human." The holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber, showing a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. Vexthalan barely glanced at it. He had seen thousands of these backwater worlds, each inhabited by some primitive species that thought fire was the height of technology. "Current status report," Zaramoth continued, her energy field pulsing with mild interest. "The humans have achieved basic spaceflight using chemical propulsion. They have established several colonies within their home system, using conventional rocket technology. Their fastest vessels require 3 months to travel from their homeworld to their outer planets." A ripple of amusement passed through the assembled representatives. Commander Thekmore, whose insectoid form clicked and chittered in what passed for laughter among his hive mind species, spoke up. "Chemical propulsion? Do they still burn things to make their ships move?" "Indeed," replied Vexthalan, his crystalline voice carrying notes of condescension. "Our long-range sensors show they are still using controlled explosions to escape their gravity well. Quite primitive. They have no energy manipulation capabilities, no quantum tunneling technology, no psionic enhancement whatsoever." The display zoomed in, showing crude metal cylinders with flames shooting from their base. The council members watched with the same detached interest they might show when observing insects building colonies. These humans strapped themselves to barely controlled bombs and hoped physics would carry them safely to their destination. "Have they discovered faster-than-light travel?" asked Representative Quilth, her gaseous form swirling in patterns that indicated casual curiosity. "No," Zaramoth replied. "They appear to believe the speed of light cannot be exceeded. Their scientists have theoretical frameworks suggesting such travel is impossible without exotic matter. They have no understanding of space folding, dimensional shifting, or reality manipulation. The Council had mastered these technologies millions of years ago. They could step from one star system to another as easily as walking through a doorway. They could bend space and time to their will, create matter from pure thought, and exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The idea that any intelligent species could still be limited by the crude boundaries of physics seemed almost quaint. "Energy production methods?" inquired Thekmore. "Fusion is their most advanced power source," Vexthalan answered, consulting the data stream flowing through his crystalline matrix. "However, most of their civilization still relies on burning fossil fuels. They have recently begun experimenting with solar collection and nuclear fission, but their energy output remains pathetically limited." The display showed massive installations on the human homeworld, smokestacks belching dark clouds into their atmosphere. It was almost sad, really. These creatures were still poisoning their own air to generate power, while beings like the Etherians could tap directly into stellar cores or draw energy from the quantum foam itself. Military capabilities? This question came from War Prime Vorthon, the only council member who still maintained a physical military force, though more out of tradition than necessity. "Negligible," Zaramoth replied without hesitation. "They possess nuclear weapons, but these are crude fusion and fission devices. No particle beam technology, no reality-altering weaponry, no consciousness disruption fields. Their most advanced combat vessels are chemical-propelled missiles carrying conventional explosives." Vorthon's multiple heads nodded in unison. His species had fought wars across galactic clusters using weapons that could unravel the fundamental forces holding matter together. The thought that someone might threaten another being with simple atomic fusion seemed almost adorable. The surveillance data continued to flow. The humans had indeed spread throughout their solar system, But their expansion was painfully slow and inefficient. They built massive structures on dead worlds, mining asteroids with primitive mechanical tools. Their space stations were crude assemblages of metal and plastic, spinning to create artificial gravity because they lacked the technology to manipulate gravitational fields directly. Cultural assessment? Asked Counselor Xylphon, her plant-like form rustling with interest. As the Council's specialist in civilization development, she tracked the social progress of lesser species. Surprisingly advanced for their technological level, Xylphon admitted. They have achieved global communication networks and appear to have unified their world government within the last century. However, they still engage in resource conflicts and show typical pre-Enlightenment territorial behaviors. The holographic display shifted to show human cities, bustling with activity. To the Council's enhanced perceptions, it looked chaotic and inefficient. Millions of individuals moving about their daily lives without any central coordination, each pursuing their own goals without regard for universal harmony. How primitive civilizations managed to function at all remained a mystery to beings who had transcended individual consciousness millennia ago. Recommendation for contact status? Saramoth asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Maintain current classification, Vexithalan stated firmly. Pre-contact civilization, development level 2, threat assessment negligible. They are at least 5 centuries away from achieving the minimum technological requirements for Council membership. Perhaps longer, given their attachment to primitive physical sciences. The Council had strict protocols for making contact with developing species. A civilization needed to demonstrate mastery of at least 3 fundamental forces: space-time manipulation, energy-matter conversion, and consciousness enhancement. The humans had barely grasped one, and their approach to it was so crude it barely counted. Agreed, rumbled Thekmore. They show no signs of developing beyond their current limitations. Their scientific methodology is constrained by their insistence on physical laws and mathematical proofs. They lack the intuitive understanding necessary for true advancement. One by one, the other Council members voiced their agreement. The humans would remain uncontacted, left to develop at their own glacial pace. Perhaps in a few thousand years they might stumble onto something interesting, but for now they were just another unremarkable species on just another unremarkable world. The vote was unanimous. The humans would be reviewed again in 100 years, assuming they hadn't destroyed themselves with their primitive weapons, or poisoned their world with their crude energy production methods. Until then, they warranted no further attention from beings who had transcended the physical universe itself. As the Council moved on to more pressing matters, none of them bothered to examine the detailed scans of human space more carefully. If they had, they might have noticed something odd about some of the massive structures the humans were building throughout their system. Long, straight installations that stretched across entire asteroids, filled with complex electromagnetic equipment that didn't quite match their assessment of human technological capabilities. But the Council saw what they expected to see. A primitive species playing with simple physics while their betters contemplated the mysteries of existence itself. The humans could keep their chemical rockets and their fusion reactors. The galaxy belonged to those who had evolved beyond such crude limitations. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the ESS Defiance, her hands clasped behind her back as she watched the impossible sight unfold on the main display. 3 ships had appeared in Earth's outer system without warning, without any energy signature, without any trace of their approach. One moment the void had been empty. The next, these alien vessels hung in space like jewels against the darkness. Time to arrival at our position? Chen asked, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what was happening. First contact with an alien civilization was something humanity had dreamed about for centuries, but she had not expected it to happen during her watch. At their current speed, approximately 6 hours, reported Lieutenant Torres from the sensor station. His hands moved quickly across his controls, gathering every scrap of data the Defiance's instruments could provide. Captain, these ships, they're not showing any engine emissions at all. No heat signature, no particle trails, nothing. They're just moving through space without any visible means of propulsion. Chen nodded grimly. 20 years in the colonial navy had taught her to recognize when something was far beyond human technology. These ships moved like they owned the laws of physics, bending them to their will with casual ease. Their design was unlike anything in human engineering databases smooth. flowing curves that seemed to shift and change as they moved through space. "Ma'am, we're receiving a transmission," called Communications Officer Patel. "It's coming through on all frequencies simultaneously. Universal translation protocols are... somehow they're working perfectly. Like these aliens already know our language." The voice that filled the bridge was musical, almost hypnotic, carrying undertones of vast intelligence and even vaster boredom. "Primitive inhabitants of the third planet, we are representatives of the Galactic Council. We have observed your species and deemed you adequate for initial contact procedures. Prepare a single representative to be transported to our vessel for formal greeting protocols." The silence on the bridge stretched for several seconds. Chen felt her jaw clench as the words sank in. "Primitive inhabitants, deemed you adequate. Be transported to our vessel." Every phrase dripped with the kind of condescension she had encountered from Earth's old colonial powers when she was growing up on Mars. "Sir?" Torres looked at her expectantly, waiting for orders. Chen considered her options. The smart play would be to follow their instructions, send a diplomat to their ship, and hope these aliens were as benevolent as they seemed to assume they were. But something in their tone set her teeth on edge. She had dealt with bullies before, both human and now apparently alien. "Open a channel," she ordered. "Channel open, Captain." Chen took a deep breath and stepped forward. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth Systems Alliance vessel ESS Defiance. We appreciate your interest in establishing formal contact with our species. However, we prefer to conduct first meetings on neutral ground. Perhaps we could arrange a meeting at a point equidistant between our vessels." The response came back almost immediately, and Chen could hear the surprise in the alien voice, followed quickly by irritation. "You misunderstand your situation, Primitive One. This is not a negotiation. You will comply with standard uplift protocols as established by the Galactic Council. Your species has been classified as pre-contact civilization level 2. Resistance to our procedures is both futile and unnecessary." Torres looked up from his console, his face pale. "Captain, I'm reading power buildups on all 3 alien vessels. They're also changing course, moving directly toward Earth now instead of toward us." Chen felt something cold settle in her stomach. The aliens weren't here to negotiate or even to make friends. They were here to collect specimens like scientists studying bacteria in a lab dish. The casual assumption that humanity would simply comply with their demands spoke of a species that had never encountered meaningful resistance. "What's their new arrival time at Earth?" she asked. 4 hours at current acceleration, Torres replied. "Captain, they're moving faster now. Whatever propulsion system they're using, they just increased their speed without any apparent effort." Chen stared at the tactical display, watching the 3 alien ships approach her homeworld with the confidence of beings who had never been challenged. They flew in perfect formation, beautiful and serene as angels descending from heaven. But angels, Chen reflected, were often harbingers of destruction. "Get me a secure channel to Fleet Command," she ordered. "Priority Alpha, and patch me through to the Mars defense grid." "Yes, ma'am." Patel's fingers flew over his console. "You're connected to Admiral Singh at Fleet Command and General Martinez at Deimos Station." 2 faces appeared on Chen's secondary display. Admiral Singh looked tired, the weight of commanding humanity's modest space fleet showing in the lines around his eyes. General Martinez, by contrast, looked eager, almost hungry. He had been waiting his entire career for a chance to test the weapons his people had spent decades building. "Report." "Captain," Singh ordered. Chen quickly outlined the situation, describing the alien ships, their capabilities, and their demands. As she spoke, she watched both officers' expressions change from curiosity to concern to something approaching anger. "They want to what?" Martinez interrupted when she mentioned the aliens' expectation that humanity would simply comply with their procedures. "They expect us to submit to their authority," Chen repeated. "They've classified us as a primitive species and seem to believe we have no choice but to follow their orders." Singh was quiet for a moment, studying the tactical data that Chen's ship was transmitting. "Captain, what's your assessment of their military capabilities?" "Unknown, sir, but likely far in advance of ours. They have faster-than-light travel, some kind of advanced propulsion system, and technology that can translate our languages in real time. However," Chen paused, choosing her words carefully, "their approach suggests they've never encountered organized resistance. They're flying in a perfect parade formation with no defensive positioning whatsoever." Martinez leaned forward, his expression predatory. "Captain, are they within range of the grid?" Chen checked her tactical display. The Mars defense grid was humanity's most closely guarded secret, a network of electromagnetic launchers built into asteroids throughout the solar system. Most of the galaxy thought humans were still using chemical rockets and humanity had done nothing to correct that impression. Negative, sir, but they will be in 20 minutes if they maintain current course and speed. And they're heading directly for Earth? Singh asked. Yes, sir. No deviation, no caution, no attempt to negotiate. They're approaching our homeworld like they own it. Singh exchanged a look with Martinez and Chen saw something pass between them. A decision that had been years in the making. Contingency plans that had been drafted in the hope they would never be needed. Captain Chen, Singh said formally, you are hereby authorized to treat these vessels as hostile and to take appropriate defensive measures. General Martinez, bring the grid to full readiness. Martinez's grin was sharp as a blade. Sir, the Deimos array has been tracking them since they appeared. We have firing solutions locked and ready. Chen felt a mixture of fear and pride wash over her. Fear because humanity was about to pick a fight with beings who could travel between the stars. Pride because her species would not go quietly into whatever cage these aliens had prepared for them. Signal. The alien vessels, she ordered Patel. Inform them that they are approaching Earth space without permission, and that they need to halt and explain their intentions. The response came back within seconds, and this time the alien voice carried a note of genuine surprise. Primitive vessel, you are not authorized to make demands of council representatives. Continue to your homeworld and prepare for our arrival. Further interference will result in the disabling of your crude technology. Chen looked at the display showing the 3 alien ships, still flying in their perfect formation, still approaching Earth with the confidence of gods who had never been defied. In a few minutes, they would learn something about the species they had so casually dismissed. Mr. Patel, she said quietly, send a message to the alien ships. Tell them you should have asked nicely. High Counselor Zaramoth was reviewing the uplift protocols when her ship's defensive system screamed an alarm that hadn't been heard in 3,000 years. Her energy field flickered with surprise as data flooded her consciousness. Something had struck their lead vessel, but the sensors showed no missile launch, no energy beam, no exotic particle discharge. One moment space was empty. The next, a solid object moving at 15% of light speed had punched through their reality shields like they were made of paper. Report, she commanded, her harmonious voice taking on sharp edges of alarm. The ship's intelligence responded with confusion that mirrored her own. High Counselor, we have been struck by a kinetic projectile of unknown origin. Mass approximately 2 tons, composition appears to be tungsten carbide, velocity 0.15 c. Impact has caused severe structural damage to our forward sections. Zaramoth's energy field pulsed with disbelief. A kinetic projectile? Solid matter hurled through space. What kind of primitive barbarism was this? Her people had evolved beyond physical weapons eons ago, developing reality-altering technologies that could unmake matter at the quantum level. The idea that someone would throw rocks at her ship no matter how fast seemed like a joke, but the damage was real. Her beautiful vessel, crafted from living crystal and held together by controlled probability fields, had a hole punched clean through it, where crude metal had simply refused to be deflected by technologies that could bend space itself. Where did the projectile originate? She demanded, computing trajectory. High Counselor. The launch point appears to be a large asteroid in the orbital zone of the 4th planet. However, our previous scans showed only mining equipment in that location. Before Zaramoth could respond, her sensors detected another launch. This time she watched in growing horror as a second projectile crossed the void between worlds. A simple tungsten rod accelerated to velocities that made mockery of everything she thought. She knew about primitive civilizations. The projectile struck Ambassador Fexthalan's ship with the force of a nuclear weapon. The Etherian vessel, designed to exist partially in higher dimensions to avoid physical attacks, crumpled around the solid metal rod that simply ignored dimensional barriers and kept moving in a perfectly straight line. Vexthalan, Zaramoth transmitted on emergency frequencies. Status report. The response came back weak and fragmented. My ship. How is this possible? The projectile shouldn't have been able to touch us. Our phase shift generators were at full power. It's just metal moving fast. It should have passed right through us. But that was exactly the problem. The humans weren't using exotic physics or reality manipulation. They were using the most basic law of the universe. Matter in motion stays in motion until something stops it. and nothing in the Council's arsenal was designed to stop something so fundamentally simple. A third projectile screamed across the solar system, launched from another hidden installation that had been masquerading as a communications array. This one missed Zaramoth's flagship by only a few hundred kilometers, but the gravitational wake of its passage was enough to set off every alarm on her ship. "Evasive maneuvers," she commanded, but her vessel responded sluggishly. Council ships were built for majesty and elegance, designed to inspire awe in primitive species. They were never intended for actual combat against beings who might shoot back. Commander Thekmore's insectoid voice buzzed with panic across the fleet communication network. "High Counselor, my ship is under attack." Multiple projectile launches detected across their entire system. How are they generating such acceleration without exotic matter manipulation? The answer would have been embarrassingly simple to any human engineer. Electromagnetic coils the size of cities, superconductors cooled to near absolute zero, and really big capacitors. The humans had built railguns on a scale that dwarfed anything the Council had imagined possible, treating entire asteroids as ammunition platforms. What the Council had dismissed as primitive mining equipment was actually the largest weapons system ever constructed in this section of the galaxy. While they flew around in ships that bent reality to their will, the humans had been quietly moving mountains and turning them into guns. Another kinetic round punched through the formation, this one traveling even faster than the others. Zaramoth realized with growing terror that the humans had multiple launch platforms, each one calibrated for different ranges and targets. They weren't just throwing rocks, they were conducting a precisely coordinated artillery barrage across interplanetary distances. Their weapons, Thekmore transmitted, his usual composed demeanor cracking. They're launching solid matter at relativistic speeds. The kinetic energy release is equivalent to antimatter warheads. How are they achieving such precision at these distances? The humans had spent centuries perfecting the mathematics of orbital mechanics and ballistic trajectories. What seemed impossible to beings who teleported everywhere they wanted to go was simply an engineering problem to a species that had learned to navigate three-dimensional space using chemical rockets, say. Fourth Council ship died, its hull perforated by a tungsten telephone pole that continued on to impact one of the gas giant's moons, with enough force to create a crater visible from Earth. The remaining vessels scattered, their perfect formation dissolving into panicked flight as they finally grasped the reality of their situation. "Retreat," Zaramoth ordered, her energy field flickering with fear she hadn't experienced in millennia. "Full spatial displacement. Get us out of this system immediately." But as the surviving Council ships prepared to engage their teleportation systems, their sensors detected something that made their situation infinitely worse. Spatial distortions were beginning to manifest throughout the combat zone, not the elegant dimensional folding that their own technology employed, but crude tears in space-time that pulsed with barely contained energy. "Impossible," breathed Vexithalan from his damaged ship. "They can't have spatial manipulation technology. Our observations showed no signs of exotic matter research or quantum field manipulation. Yet there it was, spreading across the battlefield like cracks in reality itself. The humans hadn't developed teleportation technology by following the same path as every other species in the galaxy. They had found their own way, using methods that made the Council's advanced sensors scream warnings about unstable spacetime cascades. "High Counselor," reported her ship's intelligence. "Temporal distortions detected throughout the enemy fleet positions. Whatever the humans are doing, it's affecting the flow of time itself." Zaramoth felt something that might have been terror if beings of pure energy could experience such primitive emotions. The humans weren't just shooting at them with impossible weapons, they were manipulating fundamental forces in ways that shouldn't be possible for a species that still used chemical rockets. "Emergency jump," she commanded. "Ignore safe distance protocols. Get us out of here now." But even as her ship began to tear a hole in spacetime for their escape, Zaramoth couldn't shake the feeling that they were already too late. The humans had revealed capabilities that defied everything the Council thought they knew about technological development. If they could build weapons like this while still being classified as primitive, what other surprises might they have waiting? The surviving Council ships vanished into their emergency jump, fleeing a species they had come to uplift and catalog. Behind them, the human installations continued their bombardment, filling the void with projectiles that would serve as a warning to anyone else who approached Earth without an invitation. In the depths of space, tungsten rods continued their journey toward the stars, carrying a simple message from humanity to the galaxy. Some rocks, when thrown hard enough, could shatter the pride of gods. Dr. Elena Vasquez watched the battle unfold from her secure command center, buried 3 kilometers beneath Luna City. The kinetic bombardment was proceeding exactly as planned, with tungsten rods crossing the solar system at velocities that made the alien ships look like they were standing still. But the railguns were only the opening act. Humanity's real secret weapon was about to deploy. Temporal displacement field at optimal resonance, reported her assistant, Dr. James Park. His fingers moved across controls that had been theoretical concepts just 20 years ago. The Prometheus Gate is ready for activation on your command. Elena nodded, her eyes fixed on the tactical display showing the alien ships scattered and confused by the kinetic assault. The Council's vessels were beautiful, graceful things that moved through space like dancers. They would have been even more beautiful if they weren't trying to enslave her species. Initiate temporal field deployment, she ordered. Across the solar system, hidden installations that the aliens had dismissed as communication arrays began to emit exotic energy fields. But these weren't the reality-bending technologies that the Council used. The humans had taken a completely different approach to manipulating space and time, one that relied on brute force, rather than elegant physics. The breakthrough had come from an unexpected source. Dr. Sarah Kim had been working on traffic management systems for overcrowded Earth cities when she stumbled onto something that would change the course of human civilization. If you could compress space to make cars travel faster through crowded streets, why couldn't you compress time as well? The theory was simple, even if the execution required power plants the size of small cities. By creating localized fields of accelerated time, you could make everything inside those fields move much faster relative to the outside universe. What took hours in normal space could happen in minutes within the field. The alien ships suddenly found themselves trapped in bubbles of compressed time. From their perspective, they were moving normally. Their weapons were charging at regular speed. Their escape systems were functioning perfectly, but to outside observers they appeared to be frozen in space, every action taking subjective hours to complete. Field deployment successful, Park reported. All enemy vessels are now operating at 1/10 normal temporal flow. Their teleportation systems are charging, but at current rate it will take them 40 minutes to complete the sequence. Elena smiled grimly. 40 minutes was more than enough time for the second phase of humanity's plan. Activate the Prometheus Gate, she commanded. Space tore open like fabric as humanity's first combat teleportation system came online. The technology was nothing like the elegant dimensional folding that the Council used. Instead of gently bending space-time, the humans simply punched holes through it using massive amounts of energy and some very creative interpretations of theoretical physics. The gate was crude, unstable, and required enough power to light up a continent. It could only maintain stable apertures for a few minutes at a time, and the energy requirements meant they could only operate one gate at once. But crude had already proven effective once today. Through the crackling portal came something that made the alien sensors scream in panic. The ESS Retribution, humanity's first true battleship. The vessel was ugly by any aesthetic standard. A flying brick bristling with weapons that shouldn't exist. Where Council ships were works of art, the Retribution was pure function over form. My God, whispered Park, as the massive ship emerged from the gate. I knew it was big from the specs, but seeing it, the Retribution was indeed massive, nearly 2 kilometers long and built like a fortress that happened to fly. Its hull was studded with railgun turrets, missile pods, and weapon systems that defied easy classification. Along its spine ran the largest electromagnetic launcher ever constructed, a weapon that could accelerate a projectile to 25% of light speed. But the Retribution wasn't alone. As the first gate closed, others began opening throughout the combat zone. The humans had built multiple teleportation systems, each one crude and power-hungry, but all of them functional. Ships poured through the portals, an entire fleet that had been waiting in hidden positions throughout the solar system. The vessels emerging from the gates looked nothing like the graceful Council ships. They were angular, brutal things that appeared to have been assembled from spare parts and good intentions. No flowing curves, no artistic sensibilities, just armor plating and weapons mounted on frames that could take tremendous punishment. How is this possible? The transmission came from one of the alien ships, its voice distorted by the temporal field but still audible. Our observations showed no capability for faster-than-light travel. No exotic matter manipulation, no quantum field generators, no dimensional folding technology. Elena keyed her microphone to respond. She had been waiting her entire career for this moment. The chance to speak directly to the beings who thought humanity was too primitive to matter. "You're right," she said simply. "We don't have any of those things. We found a different way." And that was the truth that would shake the Council to its core. Every species they had encountered had followed the same basic path to advancement. First, you discovered exotic matter. Then you learned to manipulate quantum fields. Then you developed dimensional folding technology that allowed faster-than-light travel. It was a progression as natural as learning to walk before you could run. But the humans had skipped steps, ignored the proper order of technological development, and brute-forced their way to capabilities that should have been impossible. They had developed time manipulation before mastering space folding, created teleportation systems that worked through entirely different principles, and built weapons that relied on the most basic laws of physics rather than exotic energy manipulation. The human fleet deployed around the trapped alien vessels like a pack of wolves surrounding wounded prey. The ships were smaller than the Council vessels, uglier, and probably less advanced in most ways. But they were here, they were armed, and they were very clearly not interested in following anyone's uplift protocols. "This is Admiral Chen of the Earth Systems Alliance," came a transmission from the lead human vessel. Elena recognized the name. Admiral Chen was Captain Chen's older sister, and apparently the family tradition of not backing down from bullies ran strong. "Alien vessels, you are surrounded and outgunned. Shut down your weapons and prepare to be boarded." The response from the alien flagship was a mixture of outrage and disbelief. "This is High Counselor Zaramoth of the Galactic Council. You cannot threaten Council vessels. Your species is classified as primitive. This is impossible." "Ma'am," Admiral Chen replied with the patience of someone explaining basic concepts to a slow child, "your classification system appears to have some flaws in it." Elena watched the tactical display as the human fleet took up positions around the alien ships. The temporal fields would hold for another 30 minutes, more than enough time to capture or destroy the Council vessels. But that wasn't the real victory here. The real victory was what would happen when the surviving aliens returned to their Council and reported what they had seen. A primitive species that built railguns capable of relativistic bombardment, a civilization that had developed time manipulation and teleportation through completely different technological paths, a race that had gone from chemical rockets to interplanetary artillery in less than a century. "Dr. Vasquez," Park said quietly, "do you think they'll leave us alone now?" Elena considered the question as she watched the alien ships struggling against the temporal fields like insects trapped in amber. The Council had come here expecting to find a species they could easily control, catalog, and manage. Instead, they had found something that challenged everything they thought they knew about how civilizations developed. "No," she said finally, "but they'll think twice before trying to push us around again. And that's a start." On the tactical display, more human ships were emerging from teleportation gates, reinforcements arriving from across the solar system. The aliens had expected to find primitives playing with chemical rockets. Instead, they had found a species that treated the laws of physics like suggestions and built weapons that could crack planets. It was, Elena reflected, probably not what they had put on their first contact protocols. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in the deep core, 50,000 light-years from Sol and what the surviving members now referred to as the human incident, the great chamber that had hosted peaceful deliberations for 3 millennia, now hummed with tension and barely contained, panicked at High Counselor Zaramoth's containment field flickered with instability as she addressed the assembled representatives. Her energy matrix still bore scars from the battle, places where the shockwaves from human kinetic weapons had damaged her fundamental structure. She had never imagined that crude matter could harm a being of pure energy, but the humans had found a way. "We have severely underestimated the species designated as human," she began, the words tasting like poison in her energy field. "Our first contact mission has resulted in the loss of 8 vessels and the capture of 4 others. Of the 12 ships in our diplomatic fleet, only 4 escaped. A ripple of shock passed through the chamber. The Council hadn't lost ships to hostile action in over 2,000 years. Not since the last of the younger species had been properly educated about their place in the galactic order. The idea that primitives with chemical rockets could destroy Council vessels seemed like a bad dream. Ambassador Vexthalin shifted his crystalline form, the cracks in his structure clearly visible even after emergency repairs. High Counselor, I have reviewed the sensor data from the engagement multiple times. I still cannot comprehend how their weapons functioned. They launched solid projectiles at relativistic velocities using what appears to be electromagnetic acceleration on a massive scale. Explain, requested Representative Quilth, her gaseous form swirling with nervous energy. Vexathalin's response carried undertones of professional bewilderment. They built railguns, Quilth. Enormous railguns using entire asteroids as launch platforms. The concept is so primitive it predates most species' discovery of energy manipulation. Yet they scaled it to a degree that made it effective against our defensive systems. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Every Council species had abandoned kinetic weapons early in their development, moving on to more elegant solutions like disruptor beams, reality alteration fields, and consciousness-affecting technologies. The idea that someone would continue developing crude ballistic weapons to such extremes had never occurred to them. Their defensive systems, continued Vexathalin, were equally incomprehensible. They somehow created localized temporal acceleration fields that slowed our movements relative to normal spacetime. Our weapons charging sequences that should have taken seconds required subjective hours to complete. Commander, Thekmore's compound eyes glittered with something that might have been respect in his insectoid species. The temporal manipulation technology alone should have required at least 1,000,000 years of development beyond their current level. Yet they appear to have developed it through completely different principles than any known method. War Prime Vorden leaned forward, his multiple heads focusing intently on the discussion. As the only Council member who maintained actual military forces, he understood the tactical implications better than most. Show me their teleportation technology. The holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber, showing the chaotic energy signatures of human spatial manipulation. Where Council gates were smooth, elegant tiers in spacetime, the human portals looked like wounds in reality itself, crackling with barely contained forces that should have been impossible to control. This makes no sense, Vorthon muttered, studying the data. They're not folding space, they're not manipulating exotic matter. They're not even using quantum entanglement principles. They're just ripping holes through dimensions using brute force and massive energy expenditures. Indeed, Zaramoth replied grimly. Our analysis suggests their teleportation systems require approximately 1,000 times more energy than our equivalent technology. They compensate for this inefficiency by building power generation systems on a scale we had not thought possible for their development level. The tactical implications were staggering. A species that could build weapons and defensive systems through completely different technological paths was unpredictable in ways that made standard threat assessments meaningless. How could you plan for an enemy whose solutions to basic problems defied everything you thought you knew about physics and engineering? What about their ships? Asked Counselor Xylphon, her plant-like form rustling with anxiety. Crude but effective, Vorthon admitted reluctantly. No exotic materials, no reality manipulation systems, no consciousness-affecting capabilities. Just metal armor, chemical propulsion, and weapons that throw solid projectiles very, very fast. They built their fleet like they were planning to fight other ships exactly like themselves, which made them surprisingly effective against our technology. The display shifted to show images of human vessels, angular and brutal compared to the flowing artistry of Council ships. They looked like weapons that happened to fly rather than spacecraft that happened to be armed. Every line spoke of a species that expected violence and had prepared accordingly. There's more, Zaramoth continued, her energy field dimming with what could only be called despair. Our long-range surveillance has detected similar electromagnetic installations under construction in 17 other star systems. The humans are not content to defend only their homeworld. They are expanding, and every colony they establish becomes a potential weapons platform. The silence that followed was profound. For 3 millennia, the Council had been the undisputed masters of known space. They had grown comfortable with their superiority, confident that their path to advancement was the only viable one. The possibility that crude matter hurled at absurd velocities could threaten beings who could manipulate reality itself had simply never occurred to them. "Recommendation for response?" Zaramoth asked, though her tone suggested she already dreaded the answer. War Prime Vorthan was the first to speak. "Military action is inadvisable. We have no effective countermeasures against their kinetic weapons, and their expansion rate suggests they could have dozens of fortified systems within a few decades. A war with the humans would be costly at best, potentially catastrophic at worst." "Diplomatic contact?" suggested Xylphon hopefully. "They captured 4 of our ships," Vexthalin pointed out, "complete with crew and technology. Any diplomatic mission would need to begin with an apology and a request for the return of our people. The humans would be negotiating from a position of strength. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The Galactic Council, supreme authority over known space, would have to approach a species they had classified as primitive and ask politely for the return of their captured vessels. The humiliation was almost unbearable. "Classification change," Zaramoth announced formally. "The human species is hereby reclassified as Alpha-level threat, status hostile neutral, development level unknown. All Council vessels are ordered to maintain a minimum distance of 100 light-years from human space until further notice." The vote was unanimous, but it felt like a surrender. They were quarantining themselves from a species they had come to study and catalog, admitting that the primitives with chemical rockets posed a genuine threat to the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. "There is one final consideration," Zaramoth added quietly. "If the humans have achieved these capabilities through such radically different means, what other technologies might they develop that we cannot predict or counter? We have observed only their defensive and basic faster-than-light capabilities. We have no idea what they might create given more time and resources." The thought sent a collective shudder through the assembled representatives. A species that could turn asteroids into weapons and punch holes through space-time using brute force might be capable of anything. Traditional threat assessment models simply didn't apply to beings who ignored the conventional rules of technological development. As the session adjourned and representatives dispersed to their home systems, each carried the same burning question: what did you do when the primitives turned out to be more dangerous than their betters? For the first time in 3,000 years, the Galactic Council faced a problem they couldn't solve with superior technology and casual superiority. In human space, construction crews worked around the clock, building new installations, new ships, and new weapons that would make their current arsenal look primitive by comparison. The universe had just learned that sometimes the most advanced civilizations were the ones that never forgot how to throw rocks. And humanity was very, very good at throwing rocks.